And hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Thompson. And as one of the facilitators of this men's program, I definitely learned that interaction is integral. So we have several reflective questions. We're going to need your voice. It's almost like we're doing live research in the room because we are capturing this as a part of what we're doing in our ongoing phases. So my name is, again, Cheryl. And while I wear many hats, I'm a social worker by trade. I'm in academia. Within this project, I took a co-lead position. And the reason being is because I wanted to see this project from a different lens. I have my own lived experience with intimate partner violence. And so this is very near and dear to me. And also I started my career working in shelter systems with women and children, then evolved working with children, and eventually started to work with perpetrators, which unfortunately was predominantly men. And as I became segued into academia, I started to become really interested with how can I work with eradicating domestic violence specifically within my community, and thus came to do many different research studies. And on this one, I wanted to take multiple different hats, which you'll hear as we go along. And as such, I'm the community leader in this one, and one of the facilitators of the actual program. Did you want to say more about yourself, Katrina? Because I don't think you said enough.
Were folks able to hear me? Wow.
So much better. I think this one's a little low, but we'll go with that.
I don't have to repeat anything, right? Okay, good.
You can do the French one, though. All right. So our session today introduces a community-driven model for engaging Black men in domestic violence prevention. It's going to be grounded in Afrocentric principles and Ubuntu and trauma-informed and anti-racist practice. And then we highlight systemic context, our program model, and we're going to look at our practical strategies of how we've done the work. So the objective of the workshop, we want to identify trauma-informed and Afrocentric frameworks for engaging Black men in domestic violence prevention, explore strategies for training and mobilizing Black men as peer mentors and community leaders, and apply relational and healing-centered approaches to foster accountability and transformation. So how are Black men framed in your work is our starting question. So we want to just give you an opportunity. We have some notepads and paper. You can use your phones. I see the phones already coming out. Whatever you need to do to think about it. But we want to hear from you in terms of this question. I want you to think about ways that Black men show up or are made to show up in your policies, your programs, in your research. So what you can write as a prompt here is one dominant narrative, explicit or implicit, about Black men you have seen in your work. One way that these narratives has shaped practice or policies in your setting, and then a missed opportunity for leadership, accountability, or healing you have observed.
And we want you to be, honest. We want you to name those stereotypes as well, right? So don't make it pretty. Just be honest and transparent with the narratives that you have seen and heard.
Yeah. What I'll often say is keep it, don't filter, but keep it G-rated. So let's take a couple of seconds here to let that sink in. And then we can start anywhere in terms of what are your thoughts? Don't filter what's coming to mind in terms of the experiences about how Black men are framed in the work that you do. And if they're not framed, that's something as well to highlight as well.
Black men as clients, but what we're hearing from women, Black women, especially from Nigeria, is that they're great providers, they're great partners. Women really rely on them, and back home, polygamy was okay. We wanted to just listen and not to judge, and then we ask more questions. So that's what in terms of my connection through my clients. That's the image that I have.
You said not to filter, right? So as a Black woman working with Black women, I think most men are devils. Okay. Cheats. And we've seen, that is, that's a community, bringing it from the community. And we see that many of our Black men are labeled as baby papas, and we don't know where it's coming from, but it's like monkey see, monkey do. So the younger men, in the absence, grow up without the presence of, many of them grow up without the presence of their fathers, because of all the systemic whatever, and so as such, they don't have models, to teach them, positive masculinity. And so they learn from the streets, they learn from the, as African, Canadians, we learn from the African Americans, right? And, things like that. And I would tell you, it's also being pushed on the kids in the schools. So just a very brief, lived experience of mine. So when my child was junior kindergarten, so at that early age, we never used the word jail in my house. My kids saw, a police arrest somebody and put in there. I was like, oh, that's a cage, not jail, right? So, my kids, played with that word cage. So at school, in Ontario, they do, early screening, dental screening. So as, he was one of the youngest in the class. And he wasn't really too open to others. So when the nurse was trying to get him to open his mouth, he told the nurse that if the nurse was disturbing him and he was going to put her in a cage. Do you know, when I went to pick him up that day, I got a lecture by the principal. I got lectured by the principal because the principal wanted to ask me, oh, did something happen over the weekend? Because Khalid mentioned something about jail. I said, no, we don't use that. Said cage. He must have said cage because we didn't use jail in my house at that time. And I told her, yeah, we're just wondering. I said, well, all kids play robbers and cops, right? So why was it a big deal for a child to say, I'll put you in the cage if you disturb me? And it was like the principal wanted to know if something had happened and the police were involved and things like that. So these are the kind of experiences that, our men do face, and boys as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? You're going to have to run. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Danielle Jocelyn, and I'm here with the Canadians Foundation in terms of the partnership that we collaborated with. However, I'm speaking with and on behalf of my work as chair of the Black Healing Center based in Montreal. And in regards to our work with Black men, the words that came up for me were absent in their presence of the work. So we are focused on accessible mental health care for Black communities in Montreal. A little bit difficult to engage and to include in conversations. And there's definitely barriers of recruitment. However, doing incredible work in their own respective ways when it comes to designing wellness spaces for men in Montreal. There's a lot of great things and initiatives happening. When I had recently surveyed them to understand what was contributing to their lack of engagement and or the barriers for recruitment, what came up was, fear of vulnerability. And another big theme was not wanting to be perceived as something, as if something was wrong with them. Because when we talk about wellness specifically and mental health and trauma specifically, women are much more open, if we're going to be gendered, to having these conversations. Black men, on the other hand, I think are still a little bit weary and we're willing to engage so long as the framing of the conversation wasn't around mental health or wellness. So we had to learn how to switch our framing a little bit and still have those conversations.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Susan. I'm also from Calgary, so it's great to have Calgary in the room. The organization that I'm with in Calgary, we provide a second stage shelter and then a children's center for kids who've experienced violence and abuse and trauma. But the organization was led by a Black woman for about 16 years. We have Black leadership. And so how we see Black men is kids' dads. And even though we're providing shelter to women who are at greatest risk of being killed by their ex-partner, and that's the frame that we've taken because the courts are still requiring co-parenting. And so that's I think maybe it's just atypical in terms of our posture, but at the end of the day, they're kids' dads. And so that's the approach, and that's how we try and engage. And even in our program design and planning, it's going from that fatherhood lens. I've also worked in forensics. That's a whole different experience. And I would say my experience in working in forensics is that Black men are a few ladder steps above Indigenous men, but not treated very well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elaho. I'm from Sudbury, and I'm originally with the YWCA. In my line of work, just recently, so that's why I'm really happy about this topic. So just recently, I started working as a facilitator for the BOW program through the YWCA. And one of the reasons we're partnering with the Afro Women in Youth Center in Sudbury. And one of the major reasons why YWCA decided to partner with the Afro Women in Youth Center is because they're more centralized, maybe around the Nigerians, coming to Sudbury or newcomers. And there was a recent incident that happened where a man killed his mother-in-law and then stabbed his wife, but she was lucky to get away, and he tried to kill himself. So coming from that angle, it's about men being maybe, I don't want to use the word, maybe being evil or something like that. But if you got to see or hear from people who knew the woman personally, you would find that it was a situation whereby the man was broken. He was a provider, came from home. He came over from Nigeria and came to Sudbury. she was a student and he decided he was working and he paid all of the bills. He sold everything that he had back home. And when she got here, got into money. And the man who originally is an architect, maybe probably got to Canada and couldn't get work in his field. So probably started doing lower income jobs just to make ends meet. She was done with school and started earning money. And then, always getting shifts and all of that and abandoned the children. And then maybe she brought her mom in, but both of them, like teamed up and maybe made the man's life live in hell. So it was on like that for years and he couldn't cope anymore. So that's why he did what he did. So sometimes I know there's no excuse to kill anybody. There's no excuse to commit crime or do something bad. But sometimes when men too are humans, they have blood flowing in them. And, when you push someone to the wall or to the edge, there's an adage, it's a Nigerian adage that says that, the goat is a very calm animal. Nobody has ever known a goat to bite or to do anything. But there's a saying that when you push a goat to the wall, when it doesn't have anywhere to go, he might want to attack you with the horns so that he or she can escape. So that's one of the things that I feel like, that's what's happening with a lot of men. It's evil or what's been done to them, and then they begin to revolt. And then everyone blames it on them and say, oh, a black man is a criminal or but sometimes it has to do with circumstances. So that's where I see black men from a place of all my line of work. Thank you.
So just one more.
Hi, my name is Natania, and I'm from the GTA. I won't disclose where I work for safety reasons, but I do work within a management position, and I do oversee, I guess, women and children that are fleeing domestic violence. I would say in the time that I've worked there, when you first asked the question, the word that came to me was violent. And I don't know, I was listening to everyone and I feel like a lot of people had great things to say. And I don't want to be like maybe the negative person in the room, but in the time I've worked at the organization we've had some pretty serious safety concerns, including also femicides that were perpetrated upon our women and children, specifically by Black men or their ex-partners. So I think that is one of the trends that we see, but I also wanted to piggyback off of an individual that I'd mentioned, the Aboriginal community. And I think that they do really great work, whether that's through their Moose Hide campaign or just other initiatives to engage men in the GBV sector. So I think that's really where, when we think of how we can support our men or maybe why some of these things are happening, it's definitely generational, but I also think that there is literally no support when it comes to engaging Black men and teaching them about healthy relationships. At the place that I work at, we have implemented a public education program specifically for this purpose, to go out in the community as well as go out into the schools to engage young Black men and teaching them forms of healthy relationship. But I also wanted to maybe also bring in another angle to this, just because I also don't know if maybe people in this room, but from personal experience, a lot of violence has been perpetrated, whether it's upon maybe myself or people that I know, specifically from Black men, whether it may be our fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers. So I think that's also an important context to include in the conversation.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks so much. Wow. I just want, can folks hear me? This seems quite
It's a
low.
little bit more.
I just want to say thank you so much for being transparent and vulnerable with the things that you have shared. And typically when we do this work, we like to ground the space to say, this is emotional work, everyone. And I know you're here recognizing this is a DV conference and so forth. But I want you to know that please do take care of yourselves. If anything that we share in this space is triggering for you in any way, please know that you can step out. If you need support, also let us know, and we'll be here to guide you through it, okay? Because what we're going to be sharing today, what you might hear from others in the room, might be triggering, it might be emotional. Definitely, I think, I'm not removed from this work because I'm very much in the trenches along with Cheryl. And it's like, it still gets emotional as well, even working through the manuals, and you'll hear more about that work. But we're going to continue for just to ensure that we can get through the time that we have with you.
Sorry. I'm trying to stay away from you so that doesn't do that. But, as someone who was actually facilitating the group, for many of you who came and you thought you might be a top-down approach where we're just going to give you information on our stats and our data, and I promise you we'll get there. But this is what has grounded a lot of the conversations that we've been having in the group. I am one of the co-facilitator. I co-facilitate the group with a man who is the director of the Men Engage in the European sector. So he's heavily done this work in gender-based violence. And then there's 2 other young ladies within the space who are our research assistants. But then we started out with 30 men, and now we're down to the 24 men. And so even in that space, I'm very careful to listen and hear. And so we wanted to start out with really hearing your voices, because that's one of the things that they continue to say each week, is that there's no space to just be heard in a way that doesn't judge my experiences and allows me to have them regardless of where I've landed up or how I got here. So we want to continue on with the reflection before we get to where we are. We want to debrief a little bit, because some of you used some of the words that came from our research study as well, such as violent. So the very first question, who gets framed as violent, as resilient, and as redeemable? Where are Black men made visible? And then where are they erased? How do these narratives impact domestic violence prevention work? So as we funnel down and think about the first 2 questions, how do the things that frame what we do prevent us from actually doing the work? Which one? So as an example, violent came out, right? So where are Black men made visible in terms of this idea of violence, and where are they erased or made invisible? And then how does that idea of violence prevent us in terms of doing that work, domestic violence prevention work, if we're framing them in that way? We ask for reflection, so we have to ask for steps too. Oh, you got one?
Thank you. We work with men who use violence in their relationships by offering the partner assault response program, which in Ontario is mandated by the Ministry of Attorney General for individuals who are charged to go and complete this program, learn about healthy relationships, and that violence is wrong. It's a psychoeducational group for those who don't know enough about PAR. So when we have men from the Black communities, of course, when you talk about violence and trauma and healthy and not, for someone who's been exposed to trauma, even if it's psychoeducational, you're removing parts of them that you might not know about. And when Black men try to talk about these things, sometimes I hear my facilitators shutting them down. No. We're here to take accountability. But again, how can you take accountability when you are hurt? When you feel that the person who hurt you did not take responsibility. So, it's hard work to balance accountability with compassion. But I think our focus, because we often talk about being sector based on justice, right? So you're either good or you're bad, right? So we can't think beyond that in par. I'm just talking about par. And then we're doing more harm than good when we're shutting down those conversations because, oh my God, I have to cover this topic today. So I don't have time to listen to you, or I'm uncomfortable with what you're sharing with me about how you've been mistreated. I don't know how to deal with that. I'm not a therapist. Like, you know, all these things that happen inside of our head. So I think that prevents us from doing good domestic violence prevention work. I'm not just talking about IPV too. I'm talking domestic violence as an umbrella, because women face violence, not just from intimate partner, right? From other individuals in their lives. And also men face violence that is different, but also from partners sometimes. And we know, if we want to talk stats, and I'll finish, sorry, I'm passionate about this. But when we talk stats, we look at Government of Canada website, it does say, actually, we never talk about that because we always focus on physical violence. But do we know that men and women experience emotional and psychological violence at similar rates? But men, in addition to that, have to deal with ridicule, feelings of like invalidation, feelings of being dismissed. So the impact is huge. It's huge. And it's not to minimize the impact on women, but I think we do disservice if we ignore the need to support the men.
Thank you. Thank you. Very profound. And absolutely, because this week on Monday night, our topic was about accountability. And as we framed it and talked about it, and you know, by the end of it, I must have said something very profound, because every man said that we talked about this idea of accountability without assigning shame to accountability. So they were able to share and be their true selves. I see Patrina prompting me, so we do need to keep moving so we get through what we came here for. And some of our reflective questions, please jot down what you're thinking so that when we come back to it, you can highlight those as well. But why does this matter? What is the point? Why are we doing this work, and how did we get here? Dominant narratives, they portray Black men in certain ways, don't they? Right? Within our societal structure, I'm sure if I said, you know, let's do a movie, we not only frames Black men, but we certainly frame many marginalized groups in a certain way. But few intervention centers have Black men as leaders, because one of the things we're doing in centering is this idea of leadership within. So we're training men to actually go out into their community to lead this work in the eradication of domestic violence. And the few interventions center them as not only just leaders, but the leaders of the actual healing and doing the work that is required to undo the damage that has been done. So we must reframe the narrative in order to mobilize the work, reframe what we're doing. So we have within our group and within the things in our manual, we've named them explicitly what the issues are, but we've also taken those very words that have been labeled and blamed and shamed and ridiculed, as we said, you know, and we have reframed it as a group in terms of using those words as empowerment strategies to take the work forward as well. So we know in terms of the system and the larger systemic issues that you know, engage this work and also center the experiences of Black men, so anti-Black racism in all of our systems. So whether it be our justice systems, you guys are naming them. And what we do as well, I think very well in the group, I might say, is allow them to name the experiences that they're having. And then we take those and not just assign blame to those systems, but then it then allows them to do the inner work to then take accountability as to how those systems have shown up in the violent acts that they use. And, you know, one of the things that has come up a lot as well is this idea of silence, being silenced within society as being an act of violence, right? I get so passionate too, so I want to like run over my words as well. So trying to calm myself down. So child welfare systems, education systems, health systems, all of the various systems. And while some of them may not have the language, they have the experiences that inform the language, the lived experiences of what they've actually went through. And what we're also seeing is a community coming together within the group to inform the things that they're experiencing individually as a collective issue, not that it's just individual. We have a legacy of patriarchy. So we have a society that has provided a notion of how Black men are supposed to show up and what it should be like, and a lot of the challenges for them around not showing up in the same way. So what's interesting too is that within the current group, there are young men, there are elders within the group. So the range of age is quite beautiful. And what I hear a lot is the younger folks talking a lot about the different roles that they want to actually have in their life, whether it be fathers, whatever it is, and how they don't want to show up in the way in which they've been framed. And how they are now taking the accountability to say, well, I have agency and choice to actually show up in different ways. Because there's intergenerational trauma, a lot of discussions around, well, this was just passed down. This is how we always do it. So, is there another way to do it? And it might sound like, oh, it goes without saying. But when you've been rendered powerless in a system, you really are not seeing outside of the box to be able to say there's another way to do something or how to do it when you're almost feeling shackled by just living day to day and the racial trauma that you're experiencing within yourself. So our guiding frameworks, we use Ubuntu, I am because we are. That centers every single one of our experiences. We take our individual experiences and bring it back collective in terms of doing the work collectively. We use our Afrocentric knowledge and principles, community healing. I'm often saying every week that, this idea of we're healing collectively. We are doing this work. So we-centered language, also while dealing with my own experiences of hearing what I'm hearing. So healing and a legacy. So what are we going to do? We're talking about how do we change this for the next generation. We're actively thinking about the next generation as we're actually doing this work. And then critical race theory and trauma informed. So recognizing that many of the experiences are trauma led or traumatic for the person. They're not just incidents, but sometimes many different incidents that bring them to the place that they are. And our critical race theory, which grounds us in terms of the collection at every stage, actually. At every stage, we've been using that to kind of ground our own knowledge as a team and within the group to center what it is that we're doing. This is you now? Yes.
The click on, because I thought that would be better. Thank you. Can folks hear me? Awesome. All right. So I just want to say, I'll tell you a little bit about the project in terms of how, who funded the project and so forth and how things have been going. So this is a Public Health Agency of Canada funded project. It's 4 years. And there are essentially 4 phases to the project. And we didn't want to make assumptions despite our own positionality and social location as Black women doing this work. We really wanted to understand, what is a body of literature, scholarship out there? What are folks saying? And I must say, even when I was doing my own research from my master's to my PhD, there is still very little research. I'm one of a handful of scholars across Canada that's doing this work, right? And so even with the government of Canada, it's only recently that they have started to do disaggregated data, right? So before everyone was homogenized as what? Minorities, and it's like now we have some research on Black people. We have some research on Asian folks, so it's, we still have a long way to go, right? In terms of this research, we did a scope and review, we did an environmental scan, and those, the findings that we have, those will be published soon. One of the environmental scan, we really wanted to understand what are some services available to Black communities? Very few across Canada. We also wanted to understand what is a scholarship? How are Black communities defined in domestic violence? So in our phase 1, we really wanted to meet with practitioners to understand what are the conceptualizations of domestic violence in Black communities. And even though I've been doing this work, as I've said, I was quite surprised in terms of, oh, that's how they're defining domestic violence. And they're not using conjugal violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence. They're using such words as he hit me, he pushed me, and they're using other things. He's just being erratic or whatever. And so for us, even doing this work, that's really important for us to recognize that the terms that we use, I think sometimes we sanitize it, right? These are Eurocentric terms that might not reflect well in Black communities. And for me, being from Ontario but living in Alberta now, we have a large African population, people from various parts of Africa. And for me, that was an eye-opener in terms of how these communities also define domestic violence, right? We wanted to make sure that the research was rooted in community. So we have a community guidance group. We run everything that we're doing from them to them. We actually get their perspective as well in terms of, in terms of our website, how does this look? How might this be perceived by the community? We ask them about even the conceptualizations that we've come up with to get their feedback. And so tons of data. We have tons of data that we have generated over the last 3 years. And now, as Cheryl has mentioned, she is she is facilitating the men's group, and it is so rich. It is so rich. Just developing the manuals was an eye-opener, but also an emotional process. And you will hear more about that as we continue. Next slide, please. All right. So the purpose of this project, men were always our number one priority, but we took a wide, broad community approach. And so for this project, we looked at practitioners' perspective, people with lived experiences of domestic violence to inform the work. And it's after we gathered that data from looking at what the scholarship is telling us, what our practitioners telling us, and people with lived experiences telling us about DV, that we said, okay, we feel well positioned now to develop these manuals to train Black men. So there were 3 manuals that were developed: a trainer's manual, a facilitator's manual, and a workbook for Black men. And so the purpose of this training is actually to not only engage Black men, but also provide a mentorship opportunity as well as leadership opportunity. And sometimes when you put things on paper, you don't really know how it will translate into practice, but it was indeed an emotional journey. So as a woman doing this work, I'm like, wow, I wonder how Black men will be receiving this information as we work with them. And so, sometimes you might hear terms such as men are broken. Men are being told through this training program, you're not broken. Right? And so language has so much power, and we need to really break those chains that men have been shackled with for all these years. And so we'll tell you more about that, why we're taking that approach, right? And so we need to really look at intergenerational trauma, like the impact that these systems have also had on Black communities. But we also have to work towards healing. We have to have dialogue as well. And we also have to have accountability. And when I think of some programs that might be available to men, it's not about blame. We're not blaming men. We're saying, okay, this is what has happened. Now let's work through it. Let's support you so you can break this cycle of violence. We're also challenging systems, right? In terms of, using certain pieces. I'm a critical race scholar, so it's going to show up a lot in my work. But looking at Africentric approaches and, looking at trauma, violence, informed approaches. And so using those different frameworks, we thought that would position us well to challenge systems. So the next thing I want to share with you is the design of the project. So initially I'm like, okay, 8 weeks. And I thought, could men stick around for like 8 weeks? So I thought of condensing it to 6, but then I went back to 8 weeks again. So the good thing is that men are so engaged. And remember, Cheryl told you earlier, we went from 30 to about 24 men. It was nothing. It's not like they dropped out. We just wanted to make sure that who we were engaging with were from Alberta and Ontario. Okay. Because that's what we were funded for. And so that's the only reason the numbers changed, just in case they were from different parts of the country or the world. But even those that weren't able to continue, they were quite disappointed. So it goes to show you the need for this work. The other thing is, so 8 weeks, and what's interesting, and I wanted to thank our funders. Men are receiving an honorarium of $100 per session, right? And so if you think about it, this is very expensive to really facilitate something like this. But we recognize that people are showing up, they have different responsibilities, and we want to, really honor that, their time, right? And their contributions, and to say we value what you have to bring to this table. And the other thing that I want to share with you, let me just, I'm going to break down the sample sessions so you get a chance to see what we've been doing in the sessions, and you get a chance to engage in that as well. So next slide, please. All right. So we looked at Black masculinity and stereotypes. And Cheryl will probably tell you a little bit about the man box and how that generated responses from participants. We looked at intergenerational trauma and accountability. The other thing that we're looking at is emotional literacy and, how do they show up in their relationships? So healthy relationships, what does that look like? We spend a lot of time talking about leadership, and leadership is throughout the sessions. It's not just one session, it's weave throughout the session. And we also look at what are the ways in which they can transform their communities. And so a group of men, I don't know yet, maybe half of the men or just over half will be receiving funding to take up the program in whatever version. I have 3 tiers in terms of, what they might feel comfortable engaging with. And so the 3rd tier is running the full program that they have just been a part of. But the 1st tier could be something like a cookout. It could be a barbershop conversation. So there's so many different ways in which they can engage communities. And so we are doing that with Black men.
So the way in which we infuse some of the work here and our core strategies that we use, one is storytelling. So we started out our day storytelling. I asked you to tell your stories. We want them to tell their stories in their own voice, in the way that they need to tell it, so that they can be heard. And reflecting. Introspection is huge. So we're asking them to engage. In the workbook, there's a lot of engagement during our sessions, ways to ask questions. And then they're also engaging us to ask us questions as well. We have scenario-based learning. So some case studies, role playing. Powerful things are really happening as we share. Even this upcoming week, we have them sometimes in groups of 4, groups of 3. And then this week we said, we're going to put them in groups of 2, even though it was scripted for 3. Don't tell Patrina that I did that. But when we put them in groups of 2 and we went in to hear the very intimate things that they were talking about, and it changed the game a little bit in terms of them being able to actually share on a level that promoted the next activity that we moved into. We do a lot of grounding activities. So there's a lot of teaching in terms of grounding techniques, bringing ourselves back, where I'm often hearing, whoa, that was heavy. So how do we center that and how do we ground that? We have some different strategies that we use so that we can continue on doing the work. We don't shy away from everything. We lean into things as they become even more and more uncomfortable. And so those grounding strategies are highly important to be able to move forward. And then leadership practice. So Patrina mentioned, we're not, framing things in ways like you are broken. Okay, so we move it forward and we empower them within whatever context that they feel, their experiences of trauma, etc. And then we're engaging them in how do we then move to accountability. And that's done with care. That's done with a lot of repair work. That's done with a lot of giving permission to self and others in the group to actually just be. So we want to think of this idea of reimagining what leadership looks like, not the dominant discourse that we currently have. I can say a lot about that today with what's going on in the world, but I'll leave it there for all of us to continue to imagine what we have learned already about leadership and what we know within the context of our various different roles. So we're taking this a little step further to give folks or to give Black men who have not been given the permission or the idea of leadership in a way that is not rooted in violence and not rooted in a top-down structure. One of the things that myself and the co-facilitator, we try to carefully manage our relationship as well. So we're actually displaying leadership. We often joke because his resume is heavy. Like he's got the doctor, he's got a MBA, he's got a lot of different things to his name. And so we joke about this a lot because he says, we're being watched. We're modeling certain behaviors. We're doing role plays. And I'm asking him also deep questions to really help the context of showing men how to be vulnerable in a safe, and we don't even use safe, accountable space. We don't use safe. We've moved beyond this idea of safe and brave spaces. We defined that early. And our space is an accountable space. It's relational, responsive, I already talked about, shared values. So we continue to go back to what were our values that we created and remind ourselves about what we came here to do. And it's just really on transforming harm. Like we had an exercise this week where we asked them directly, tell me some time where you have caused harm. And then we moved to the leadership in terms of, okay, well, now how are we going to redefine that? And what do you do in order to, reconcile those wrongs? Is this still me or this is you? This is still me? So we're moving from this idea of narrative to practice. So yes, we want to hear the stories. Yes, they are very deep, but then we move forward in terms of what does that look like in practice? I often will say that, in teaching my classes in social work, theory to practice. What does it look like in a tangible thing? And Patrina mentioned this idea of the man box. Do folks know, if you wave at me for a sec, have you heard of this idea of the man box? Are there people who didn't? Yeah. And so even within our group, there was a lot of our participants who had never heard of the man box. And so it was coined by, I always forget the gentleman's name. You have to Google the name of the person who actually created it. And my co-facilitator actually co-facilitated with him as well. So he was very well versed in the man box, and we introduced the concept, and pretty much we had them do an activity where they drew a box and how are they showing up within their box. And we asked some questions around, what systems expect you to be in the box and who keeps you in the box was a big question. And, during the session, I tell Patrina, she's not there, but she's kind of there. So I'm like, keep your phone, because I screenshot things and send it to her because it's so powerful. Like this stuff makes me so emotional and giddy as I'm just watching the things transform. And a gentleman made a box and put a lock outside the box. And within the box, he made a silhouette of himself in the box, but almost stepping out of the box. And it was just so powerful in terms of when we then debriefed and shared, and he talked, fighting back tears about the experiences of wanting to be out of the box, but that locks keeps you shackled in the box. So my toe is out the box, but this is the first time I'm actually speaking about this box. And, some of them went to Canva, they were drawing all kinds of things. Folks are really engaged in really just redefining what that looks like. So how do we take this box and still move from this idea of, okay, what society believes around what that box will look like, and how do you then move from just the toe outside the box to being out the box? So powerful work that some of you are like, I do this stuff already. But the accountable space allows for it to be in the way that they need in those moments for the work to move forward. So there were questions here, weren't they? Yes. What would it look like to intentionally reframe Black men's roles in your policies. And we're really just asking you to hear this, not necessarily answer right now, but really hear this. If we're actually thinking about Black men in terms of their experiences, what would it take? What would it look like to intentionally reframe Black men in your policies, programs, or research? You know, even that idea of violence came up for scrutiny, came up for discussion in terms of the definition of violence and how they don't ascribe to that definition for themselves. Even if I might have done this, in a moment, I might have done an act, but now I'm labeled with this act for the rest of my life. This becomes my banner. This becomes my scarlet letter. This becomes how the world sees me. This becomes how the systems engage me, especially if I'm charged. All these things, I can't get away from it. Even though I may want to very well and want to undo, I can't undo the labels that come with me and stay with me as I move forward. Where is there room to create or scale leadership opportunities for Black men in domestic violence prevention? Is there room? How can we create room? What are some of the things that we might want to think about to do that? And then what are the risks of doing nothing and then leaving the narratives as they are?
It's amazing when you're having so much fun, how quickly time goes. I am so glad we asked for 1 hour. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes to go, and I'm going to ask that we do this as a large group exercise. Who's familiar with Ubuntu? Yes, who's familiar with trauma and violence-informed approaches? Okay, who's familiar with critical race theory? Awesome. So we're going to put our minds together and do this exercise, okay? All right. So in the session, men were asked to think of harmful language they hear at home and how they would support someone who has used harmful language, and what would that look like, okay? And so I'm just going to move through this. A fellow Black man in your peer, so next, thank you, group shares that he's been using harsh or demeaning language toward his partner. He doesn't make excuses and says, I know it's not right. I just didn't grow up seeing it handled differently. I want to change. If you were to approach this Ubuntu in terms of this a community approach, I am because we are, or, you know, Africentric leadership, CRT, critical race theory, or even trauma and violence informed principles, what are some of the things that we would need to think about? What are some things that we'd need to think about? Yes.
I think first and foremost, acknowledging the vulnerability that it takes to share and to recognize that he didn't witness, or they didn't witness that at home, and thanking them for that statement and for that recognition, and recognizing that it's very hard to mirror what we have not witnessed ourselves.
Thank you. I think from the Afrocentric praxis, I think we'll be looking at the Ujima principle of collective responsibility and accountability, but also highlighting that, you know, when some of these things are starting to come out and the damage that it causes the community. So if you're looking at that and we're looking at how we heal, I know Cheryl highlighted, like how we heal together as a community and as a village. So giving the opportunity to unpack some of these intergenerational issues that are showing up, you know, and then the importance of showing and you know, just holding space of where you share when you're hurting, because hurt people, when you're hurting and you're hurting me, then that translates. If you have children, then it's going to be impacting the children, and it has to break somewhere, just so where it is, the approach is much more of a strength-based, less than a deficit approach, and it's much more where there is embracing. Because if we're looking back from the colonizing praxis, we're looking at where we embrace people. When people are hurting, we did not discard people. We invited them in to try and understand what is it that is hurting you, because when you hurt, the community hurts. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's look at CRT as systems approach. Who has a systems approach? How do we interrogate systems? How do we reflect on systems and support this person? Systems. Challenge. Come on. Who can take up that challenge? All right. We have a hand over here.
All right, I'll do my best with this one. I was going to do TVIC, but I think it's important that we acknowledge what people can be accountable for and what they can't be. And so I think we can distinguish between how we've replicated beliefs we've been given by systems, but how systems also systematically work to keep us in a box, keep those beliefs. And I think through that, we can then also start to acknowledge where that's shown up in other areas of people's lives. So, okay, so we haven't been shown positive relationships in this sense. Where else has that shown up? Did that show up at school? Did that show up at work? Did that show up in how you think about yourself, how you talk about yourself? And then let's switch that. So if we have a little bit of accountability and control over what we think, how we act, who we engage with, and to someone's earlier point, that vulnerability, that those are all choices you're making within systems. So let's focus on the empowerment you have to make change and take like a structural approach to this, that we can change structure with individual action. Just takes a lot of time. And then I think back to that connection to each other. If we can all agree that we're going to challenge some of these beliefs, then maybe we can change that for the next generation or whatever is kind of meaningful to that particular person.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we started a couple minutes later, but if folks want a part 2 of this, please know that I'll be presenting again along with other members of my team. But we're going to go through this and wrap this up. All right. So just to give a quick recap of our group, we started with 30 Black men who have participated in this training, and they will be finished November 3rd, Cheryl, around November. And so this is a peer support that's being provided to the men as well. And some of the things I've mentioned to you in terms of how we're trying to break that intergenerational cycle. Next slide, please. And so we've had such a rich conversation today. So I really want you to think of the various ways in which you can translate what you have learned here into practice. Listen, we could teach a full course on this, but I want to share something with you in terms of what has come up, and then we'll give you a chance to ask questions. We'll feed into a couple of minutes of our next group. You know how the saying goes, hurt people hurt people? You know, people who are hurt people. A colleague of mine shared this recently, and I want to share this with you as we think of this work, DV work. Hurt people hurt people. I answered, not all hurt people hurt people. Some spend their lives making sure no one else feels what they did. Some break cycles. Some build safe spaces. Some turn pain into purpose. Hurt people don't just hurt people. Hurt people heal people too. And so I thought that was so powerful. And as I just read that to you, like chills just went all over my body. And so like, even when we do this work, we want to make sure that we think of hope as well, you know, in terms of there's hope, you know, and if you think about it, all the services that we have, and remember, I'm a Black feminist, right? All the services that we've had have primarily focused on women for all these years, for centuries, right? And so we need to reshift that narrative. If men are considered the ones doing the harm, how do we make sure that we're providing them with the supports that they need to disrupt that harm? All right. We'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, a couple of questions if you'd like. And then folks, if you'd like to stay for the second half of this, let us know. Any questions?
So I forgot to introduce myself the other time. So I'm Dr. Fadila Balogun, the Executive Director of the African Women's Alliance of Waterloo Region. So my question is, sorry, I missed it when you were talking about it, the strategies. So I got the storytelling and the introspection, the scenario-based learning. What were the other two, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl, do you want to let her know about the different approaches we're using in the group? So storytelling. I'll go back to the slide as well.
The slide was, so storytelling. We use Africentric principles and centered around Ubuntu. And then what was the last piece? Oh, accountability.
Yeah.
We're using a lot of accountability work as well.
And we have those grounding exercises and leadership pieces throughout. Yeah. Folks, thank you so much for attending this session.
It should be next. Yep, there you are. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure you've heard all about the Event Mobi app, and we're a few minutes over, so we're going to launch right into it. So I would like to welcome back to the front. We're going to be hearing from Patrina, Cheryl, and their colleague Andrea for this next 45 minutes.
For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. Can folks hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome.